L'chaim, l'chaim. Wow, l'chaim. Zat Hashem. Oh, twist. Twist and shout. L'chaim, l'chaim.
Easy.
Chevra, it's such a pleasure to get together before Purim. Toda rabba to Matan, Rebecca, thank you for hosting. Really, always such a pleasure to get together.
This is a good, very good beer.
The beer is appreciated, the food is appreciated, but most of all, the friendship is appreciated. L'chaim, l'chaim. L'chaim, l'chaim. I had a kasha I was walking around with this past week, and I spoke with Rabbi Chaim Friedman, the rabbi of Or Chaim, and he told me a beautiful chidush on Purim that explains really a very important theme of Purim that answers the questions, and also I believe will give us a very important idea going into this holiday, God willing, in 2 weeks. We're going to enter Purim, it's less than 2 weeks now. Sunday coming up, God willing, Motzei Shabbat, we're going to read the Megillah. And I think this is a fascinating chidush for me, and hopefully you'll appreciate it as well. A tremendous approach of Purim and how it affects us very directly in terms of this idea of Kimu v'Kiblu. Before we begin, I do want to make a mention that there's a seat that's empty tonight. B'ezrat Hashem, we should hear of a quick refuah shlema, a speedy recovery of Yaakov ben Dinah. And he should be able to join us, God willing, again very soon in the shiurim, and just in general we miss him. And this should be a zchut for his refuah shlema very quickly. When we look at the Purim story, there are many different themes. There's many messages, and really the storyline itself is very fascinating. In the Lunch and Learns, we've been learning just the storyline from the Gemara in Masechet Megillah. And the storyline itself is fascinating. Every step of the story, it's amazing. But there's one part of the story that has tremendous ramifications till today, which is the idea of Kimu v'Kiblu. Kimu v'Kiblu, this idea. Everybody knows the famous drasha of Kimu v'Kiblu. Hadar kiblua me'ava. It's a drasha, it's a Gemara in Masechet Shabbat. But as we're going to see tonight, there's a seat here if anybody needs. As we're going to see tonight, B'ezrat Hashem, it's really not so clear in the psukim, this whole drasha of Kimu v'Kiblu. Kiblua me'ava. Hello, Yosef.
Okay, relax.
I know what to say. Don't worry. We've done this rodeo once before. So,
You're joking on me every time. I don't even open my mouth.
L'chaim to Yosef. Okay.
יוסף, אולי תתחתן עם הרב יום אחד.
You already took me. It's okay. At the end of the Megillah, we have an amazing salvation has occurred. Haman has been hung. The Jews have defended themselves. And the Gzeira la'ashmid la'arog u'la'abed, no problem. Jews are safe, not destroyed like they were meant to be from the letters of Haman. Tremendous miracle. Now, Aleph, Bet, and Gimel, the three notes here, the first three sources, are 3 psukim at the end of the 9th chapter, towards the end of the 9th chapter. And it says like this. I want to read you 3 psukim. Okay? Again, kar'u layamim ha'ele Purim. They called these days Purim. Al Shem HaPur, because of the lottery that Haman had done. Alkein al kol divrei ha'igeret hazot, based on all of these letters. Uma ra'u al kacha, uma igi aleim, and what had happened to them. Kimu v'kiblu hayehudim aleim ve'al zar'am. Kimu means they fulfilled or established and accepted, the Jews established and accepted on themselves, ve'al zar'am, and on their children, ve'al kol ha'nilvim aleim, and all those who accompanied them. Ve'lo ya'avor lihiyot osim et shnei hayamim ha'ele, they will never cease to exist these days, kichtavam u'chizmanam, in their language and in their dates, v'chol shana v'shana, every year. And what is Kimu v'Kiblu referring to in the pasuk? Simple pshat. They established and they accepted. What did they establish and accept at the end of the Purim story?
Torah.
Oh, that's not what the simple pshat is. What's the simple pshat?
To celebrate those days?
To celebrate those days. A little more specifically, through reading the Megillah. That's the simple pshat. Kimu v'Kiblu. They established and they accepted. And it says that to celebrate these 2 days, simple pshat. And the next pasuk continues, V'hayamim ha'ele nizkarim v'na'asim. These days are remembered and performed. V'echol dor v'dor, in every generation. Mishpacha u'mishpacha, every family. Medina u'medina, in every province. Ve'ir ve'ir, in every city. V'yemei ha'purim ha'ele lo ya'avru mitoch ha'yehudim. These days of Purim will never pass from the Jewish people. V'zichram lo yasuf mizar'am. And the remembrance will never cease from their children. So the simple pshat, you read through the psukim. What's the pshat here? The Jewish people at the end of this fantastic miracle, where they were literally on the brink of destruction. I don't know if there's ever been a case like this before, where every Jew in the world was meant to be destroyed. Right? For example, I would contrast it for a second. You think about Nazi Germany. So Hitler would have loved to kill every Jew, but he didn't control the entire world. So he would have conquered the entire world, chas v'shalom, obviously Hashem protects us, and killed every Jew. But Achashverosh ruled the entire world, at least kifti pshuto. So when he sends out a letter saying that every Jew should be destroyed in every province of 127 countries, that's a death warrant for the Jewish people. Total destruction. So the miracle was tremendous. At the end of this miracle, they accept Kimu v'kibu, they accepted, they established, they accepted on themselves to read the Megillah, to keep Purim. These 2 days forever will be Purim. Okay, 14th and 15th, that's why it's 2 days. Yerushalayim is 15th, walled cities. Other cities are 14th. Beautiful. That's the simple pshat in the pasuk.
But Kimu v'kibu also remind like na'aseh v'nishma.
Okay, that's the simple reading of the pasuk. Now what I'm going to show you as we continue on here, we're going to see there's 3 Gemarot. Okay? There's a Gemara in Masechet Megillah, there's a Gemara in Masechet Shabbat, and there's a Gemara in Masechet Shavuot that take these words Kimu v'kiblu, and they say, no, there's a drasha in those words that you don't know. But as we're going to see, there are 3 different drashot. 3 different explanations of this pasuk, Kimu v'kiblu. The most famous one we already mentioned, Kiblu me'ahava, we're going to see. But that's actually not quoted in Masechet Megillah. The Masechet that talks about Purim, it's quoted in Masechet Shabbat, actually. So the first source we're going to look at is in Masechet Megillah. The Gemara there has a whole sugya trying to show a source that Megillat Esther was written Beruach HaKodesh. Beruach HaKodesh. What is Ruach HaKodesh? A divine inspiration, you could call it in English. Meaning, it wasn't just that Mordechai and Esther wrote it down on their own, but there was a divine element to it. Hashem told them what to write, and they wrote it down, and therefore it was written Beruach HaKodesh. It's part of Tanakh. It has great significance. So the Gemara brings 4 Tanaim who bring sources from the Psukim in the Megillah, and then Shmuel comes along. And Shmuel says the following. Shmuel says, I have a 5th proof. I'll tell you my proof. Amar Shmuel. So he was an Amorah. He wasn't in the same generation, but he said, if I would have been there at this discussion, trying to prove Megillat Esther was Beruach HaKodesh, was by divine inspiration, Hava Amina Miltada Adifa Mikulhu. I would have said something that's the greatest proof of all of them. The greatest proof Megillat Esther is Beruach HaKodesh. Why? Shene'emar, because the pasuk says, Kimu v'kiblu. They established and they accepted. Now how does Shmuel explain the pasuk? Kimu lema'ala. They established in Shamayim, ma shekiblu lemata. What they accepted on earth. What does that mean? It means when the Jewish people, Mordechai, Esther, Anshe Knesset HaGdolah, all the other Rabbanim there, established Purim in the mitzvah of Megillah, in Shamayim they agreed. Now the only way you know in Shamayim they agreed is if it's Ruach HaKodesh. Otherwise you don't know in Shamayim they agreed. So Shmuel therefore said, that's the pshat in Kimu v'kiblu. Kimu lemala, that in Shamayim they established Purim, they agreed, ma shekiblu lemata, what they had accepted below.
But it's not applicable for anything
This
in the world.
is not the simple pshat in the pasuk. Okay, everybody sees that? Simple pshat is Kimu v'kiblu, the Jews accepted Purim and Megillah on themselves. Now we have a chidush, drasha, is that in Shamayim, says Shmuel, they agreed to the establishment on earth of Purim and Megillah for future generations. Chidush. Okay? And this is a proof that it was Beruach HaKodesh. Now the Gemara there continues. You turn to Hey. And the Gemara there says, Amar Rava, Rava comments. Now there were 5 proofs brought from the Psukim to show that Megillat Esther was said Beruach HaKodesh. The last one was Shmuel. So Rava says, if you turn to the next page, Rava says, Lekulu itlu pircha, all of the proofs that were brought have a pircha. Pircha means a question against it. The first 4 proofs are not solid proofs. Lebarmi de Shmuel. Besides for Shmuel, the let le pircha. There's no question on him. Now we're not going to continue in that. It goes on to explain why there's questions. But what Rava comments on that sugya is every one of those proofs that are brought to show Megillat Esther was written Beruach HaKodesh with divine inspiration, they could be refuted. You can knock them off. But Shmuel says that they accepted in Shamayim, Purim, and the Megillah. There's no way to not. That's a solid proof, says Rava. Okay?
If they really accept?
If who accepted?
Shema.
That's the drasha. That's what Shmuel says. Shmuel says this is the drasha,
Okay,
and Rava says the only. Correct. Correct.
And how you prove it that they accept?
So Shmuel says that's the pshat. That's the drasha. So Rav is saying the only way they can know in Shamayim is because it was Baruch HaKodesh. Yosef's referring to he's actually asking a question. We're not going to get into that now. It is very interesting because we're bringing a proof that it was Baruch HaKodesh from the Megillah itself, and it's a kasha. It's a good kasha. We're not going to focus it on that right now.
It was written after the event, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But why does it have to be Ruach HaKodesh if the event it was a miracle itself?
It's true.
So why are we proving Ruach HaKodesh?
Well, it could be the event was miraculous, but not that the Megillah itself, the scroll, Megillat Esther, that we're going to read twice on Purim.
It's telling us what happened.
Correct. It's telling us what happened. That's exactly right. It's telling us what happened, but we're deducing from the pasuk that this was not just written stam, a recording of the story, but this is actually written with divine inspiration. That's what Shmuel is teaching us. Yeah.
Did Shmuel hear it from somewhere, or is that his?
No, he had a tradition. Let's say Shmuel had a tradition. But Rava's comment on that is, that's the only one that's rock solid. That all the other proofs you can refute, you can knock off. But Shmuel is accepted, meaning to say is, Kimu v'kiblu, they accepted in Shamayim the idea of Purim and the Megillah, and what they had accepted on earth. That's Kimu v'kiblu. Now, if we look in Masechet Shabbat, this is the most famous drasha of Kimu v'kiblu. And this Gemara, this is really where Rabbi Friedman was sharing with me an idea. It's an extremely difficult Gemara. God willing, on Shavuot, we'll discuss the first half of this. But we're not going to focus so much on it right now. But in Shabbat, these same words are quoted, Kimu v'kiblu, but they're quoted to teach us a different drasha altogether. And this becomes problematic. Let's see. We know by Har Sinai, when the Jews received the Torah, it said, Vayityatzvu b'tachtit har. This is note Vav, 6, if you look.
Yeah.
Mesechet Shabbat Pechet Amud Aleph. The Jews stood at the foot of the mountain. Amar Rav Avdimi Bar Chama Bar Chasa. Rav Avdimi Bar Chama Bar Chasa teaches, Melamed, what does this teach us? They stood, literally means under the mountain. So what does it mean? Melamed Shekafa Kadosh Baruch Hu Aleim Et Har Kegigit. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, by Har Sinai, held the mountain, exactly, over the Jewish people, Kegigit. What is a gigit?
Like a bucket.
So like a bucket of, Rashi learns it was like a barrel of beer. A barrel of beer.
L'chaim.
That's it, l'chaim.
The bottle of beer.
Like a barrel of beer. Meaning, HaKadosh Baruch Hu put the mountain over the Jewish people by Har Sinai.
Beer then?
They had beer then, yeah. Va'amar lahem, and he said to the Jewish people, Im atem mikablim haTorah. If you accept the Torah, mutav, no problem, you'll be fine. V'im lav, I'll make you a deal you can't refuse. V'im lav, and if not, sham tehei kvuratchem. There will be your burial. What is he going to do? Throw the mountain on the Jews and kill them.
So is that fair?
This is unbelievable. We're not going to focus so much on this right now. Shavuot will speak more about this. Be'ezrat Hashem. So, based on this story, Amar Rav Acha Bar Yaakov commented, and he said the following: Mikan, based on the fact that they were forced, this is honest, they were forced. Moda'a Rabba le'oraita. There is a great moda'a against the Torah. So Rashi explains, what does that mean? It means that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu would take us into judgment and say, why didn't you keep my Torah? So what would we be allowed to say back to him? He says, Lama lo kibaltem aleichem. If Hashem says to us, why didn't you keep what you accepted? Yesh lahem teshuva. They could respond, shekiblua be'ones, because we only accepted it by force. So what does it mean? They have an excuse.
But we were forced.
Can you imagine? The Jews have an excuse, says the Gemara, because since the Torah was given at Har Sinai, but with force, so therefore if HaKadosh Baruch Hu later says, why didn't you keep what you accepted? The answer is, you forced us.
Yeah, so you can't punish.
Awesome. So today we have an excuse?
You can't punish us.
Oh, so I'm a Rava, but says Rava, Af al piken, we still don't have an excuse. Why? Because Hador kiblua b'imei Achashverosh. They re-accepted the Torah in the days of Achashverosh, after the Purim story. They re-accepted the Torah. Dichtiv, like the pasuk says, Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim, the same pasuk. They established and they accepted. The Jews established and accepted. And how do we expound it here? Kimu mashekiblu kvar. They fulfilled what they had already accepted. Listen to how we read it into the pasuk. Kimu mashekiblu kvar. What does that mean? It means they reestablished what they had accepted previously. What are we talking about?
The miracle happened before.
In the days of Achashverosh, even though they had been forced to accept the Torah ba'ones, they were forced by Har Sinai, they re-accepted, they rededicated themselves to the Torah after the miracle of Purim, and therefore we have no excuse now because we accepted it not ba'ones, as Rashi explains. If you take a look at that Rashi,
The original was ba'ones.
it's true. But now we have no excuse.
Not honest now.
Look at Rashi. Oh, but the Pasuk Gemara says he was forced.
You hold the mountain on top of you and tell
That's
you
certainly
take
forced.
It, or I drop it.
Exactly.
But you forget it was all after the exile.
After what?
Varianes.
That was Baal Sinai.
No,
But B'mei Achashverosh,
so they already had Yetziat
says
Mitzrayim.
Rashi, very important Rashi, listen to this. B'mei Achashverosh, they re-accepted it. When did they re-accept it? Says Rashi, me'ahavat hanes shena'aseh lahem, because of the love of the miracle that was done for them. So, the love of Hashem who did the miracle, let's just add that in so it flows nicely. The love of Hashem who did a miracle for them and saved them in the days of Achashverosh, they were not forced, they were not compelled, they re-accepted the Torah me'ahava voluntarily, and now, therefore, we have no excuse. Beforehand, they might have had an excuse, now we don't have an excuse. Now the Rishonim all get into, does that mean B'yemei Bayit Rishon? During Bayit Rishon, they didn't have to keep the Torah? Because we know Purim was only after. The Rishonim all talk about this, they had to keep the Torah, bottom line. And God willing, we'll speak more about Kabbalat HaTorah, that whole story.
Who say about the mountain holding on?
Gemara says clearly.
Yeah.
It's a Gemara Masechet Shabbat. Peichet Amud Aleph. But what we're going to focus on here is like this. What emerges, now we have a second drasha in Kimu v'Kiblu. The first drasha, let's keep track over here. The first drasha in Kimu v'Kiblu is that, no, the simple pshat is true. The simple pshat is we've accepted for the Megillah to be performed every year. But the first drasha we're saying from Masechet Megillah is that in Shamayim, they agreed for our acceptance. Yeah. Beautiful. That's the way we know it's Ruach HaKodesh. The second drasha is Masechet Shabbat. It says that they re-accepted the Torah voluntarily in the days of Purim. Is that the same drasha? Two different drashot.
Yeah.
Okay, so far so good. Let's continue. Now, the Ben Yoyada explains on this Gemara, just to be clear, he says, you could ask, wait a second, in the days of Purim, they were also forced. Because in the days of Purim, there was a sword against their neck, literally, a gzeira. Right. So the Ben Yoyada explains, no, you have to understand, they only re-accepted after the story. Meaning, after Haman was hung and they were protected and Mordechai was elevated, and after the whole Nes happened, and they're not in a dangerous place, that's why it was, they re-accepted Me'ahava. Exactly. But now this leads us to question number one. Okay, we're going to emphasize this in a minute, but question number one is like this. We said in the Gemara, in Megillah, that the only proof that's rock solid that Megillat Esther was said Baruch HaKodesh is Kimu v'Kiblu, that in Shamayim they accepted the idea of Purim in Megillat Esther. The problem is, we know in Gemara, we go through this all the time, if you have one word, generally, you can't make two drashot. One word in the pasuk teaches you one drasha. It doesn't necessarily teach you two drashot. So maybe Kimu v'Kiblu teaches us the drasha Masechet Shabbat, that they re-accepted the Torah me'ahava, but maybe it wasn't written Beruach HaKodesh. Meaning, how do you know to expound both drashot from the same word? Maybe all it teaches us is we accepted the Torah me'ahava in the days of Achashverosh, but it does not teach us that it was Beruach HaKodesh, then Shamayim they accepted it.
Or maybe it's from the Shamayim and not...
Exactly, so now it becomes not a great proof. And Rava, this is how the Rishonim explain, Rava is the one who said in Megillah that Shmuel's proof is the strongest one, and he's the one who comments in Masechet Shabbat that Kimu v'Kiblu means that they re-accepted Me'ahava. So Rava seems to be contradicting himself here. Right. Unbelievable. Yosef, you with me over here? Unbelievable.
One contradicting himself.
Because in Masechet Megillah, Rava tells us the only solid proof is Shmuel. But Rava in Masechet Shabbat says that's not the pshat in the pasuk.
Maybe the timeline is different.
The timeline is different. The
Because
point is, there's two drashot from the same word.
Before the Nes and after the Nes?
Before the Nes and after this. There's
No,
two
no,
drashot from the same word. It's the same words in the Megillah. And there's two drashot. We go through this all the time. Maybe they don't teach us that, teach us that.
That's why,
That's the kasha.
Because we have like a timeline that's different sometimes and they're giving you an explanation. No, it was before the miracle.
Let's see.
After the miracle.
So let's see. Let's turn to the last page.
It's not a contradiction.
It's not a contradiction. We're going to have to figure this out. The third source is Natet, is number 9 here, is in Masechet Shavuot Lametet Amud Aleph. Now here the Gemara says something fascinating. We know at the end of Moshe Rabbeinu's life, he had the Jews in a place called Arvot Moav. Arvot Moav literally is the plains of Moav. Meaning at the border of Eretz Yisrael, the Jews were there. Moshe was going to pass away soon, and he affirmed the dedication the Jews have to Torah and to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he rededicated them, they accepted the Torah again, etc. The Gemara in Masechet Shavuot says, "Ve'ein li ela mitzvah shekiblu aleim mehar Sinai." I would think that they only accepted at that time in Arvot Moav the mitzvot from Har Sinai. Unbelievable thing. Mitzvot hatidot li'itchadesh kegon mikra megillah minayin. But how do we know that there at Arvot Moav, we're talking about 1,000 years before Purim, that they also accepted Megillah? 1,000 years later. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
That's what the Gemara says. How do we know that 1,000 years before, in the days of Arvot Moav, they signed a treaty to also accept Megillah, which was 1,000 years later? Talmud Lomar, therefore the pasuk says, Kimu v'kiblu. Kimu v'kiblu. Kimu ma shekiblu kfar. That in the days of Purim, they established what was already accepted. Well, when was it accepted if not in the days of Purim? What's the answer? In the days of Arvot Moav, the Jewish people had already accepted Megillah 1,000 years before the Purim story. It's unbelievable drasha. This drasha is incredible. It's a Gemara Masechet Shabbat, Lametet Amud Aleph. So what emerges now is, let's just lay this out. We have the simple pshat in the pasuk is Kimu v'kiblu. They established Purim to be kept for future generations to read the Megillah. Beautiful. We have drasha number 1 in Masechet Megillah, which is that in Shamayim, Hashem also agreed to the establishment of Purim for future generations. We have drasha number 2 in Masechet Shabbat, which is in the days of Purim, they re-accepted the Torah me'ahava, so we don't have an excuse.
Yeah.
And we have the Gemara in Masechet Shavuot that says Kimu v'kiblu means in the days of Arvot Moav, 1,000 years before the story of Purim, they had already signed an oath for the Megillah itself. So say the Rishonim, this creates a major issue now. Because the same pasuk can't teach us generally 3 different things. Because who says it teaches us? It should teach us one thing. Generally, that's the rule. And furthermore, to make the question even stronger, like I said before, Rava is the same commentary in Megillah. He says that Shmuel is a rock solid proof in Megillah, in Masechet Megillah, where he says that in Shamayim they accepted it, but he's the same person in Masechet Shabbat who gives a different drasha, that they re-accepted Megillat Esther, they re-accepted the Torah in the days of Achashverosh me'ahava. So some of the Mefarshim actually change Rava to Rabbah. They change it to a different person, so it's not a contradiction. But Tosafot doesn't like that approach. Tosafot says a different answer. Tosafot says, I'll just tell you what he says. He says, it's not really a contradiction, because these drashot are similar. So you could learn out multiple drashot as long as they're similar from the same pasuk. But Yosef's saying, they're not similar. They're different. And actually the Maharsha, I couldn't print it out fully, I wrote the footnotes, what he says, because I didn't have it on the Sefaria. But the Maharsha adds to this, and he says, the source for all of these drashot, let's just hear that, because it's very interesting. How do you know to make a drasha altogether? Because really, if it's just referring to Megillah, that they accepted the Megillah in those days, it should have said, Kiblu v'kimu. Kiblu v'kimu. What is Kiblu v'kimu?
First they received it.
First they accepted it and then they fulfilled it. That would be natural. You're referring to Megillah or Purim, they accepted it and then they fulfilled it. The fact that it says Kimu v'kiblu, there it switches the natural order. So it gives the opportunity to make these 3 drashot. But says the Maharsha, they're all equal and they could all be derived from the pasuk. But the difficulty is, they're not equal, meaning these are 3 different drashot. You have 3 different expositions, 3 different ideas that emerge from the same pasuk. We generally don't say that unless, what's the unless? No, Yosef, what's the unless? How could you derive 3 drashot from one pasuk? How could you do that?
Okay.
Gzera shava, even it happens to
It was
be.
already established in them. When there was a
If essentially they're saying the same thing,
But they're not.
so they're not.
One is Ruach HaKodesh. Right? It's 3 different.
So how are we going to
They're
say
similar line.
that these 3 drashot follow the same train of thought? That's what we're going to discuss
It's
now.
from different point of view.
So let's run through them again for a second before we continue. The first drasha we had is Masechet Megillah. It says, Kimu lemala ma shekiblu lemata. In Shamayim, they agreed to Purim and Megillah. Drasha and Megillah. Shabbat, in the days of Achashverosh, they re-accepted the Torah me'ava. First time they were forced, in the days of Achashverosh, after the miracle, they re-accepted it with
There
love.
could be 2 of them. Number, Bishaman they accepted, and also we accepted. We re-accepted again.
Voluntarily, okay.
Voluntarily.
And then the third drasha is Shavuot, which says that Arvot Moav, they already had signed a treaty on this Megillah.
It could be a whole 3 things is one story, basically.
Oh, so let's go through this now. It's
Right.
I'm going to share with you such a beautiful idea. Rabbi Chaim Friedman told me this pshat, and hopefully it'll change your Purim as well, because I thought this was such a beautiful idea.
Already changed my point.
It's already changed your Purim. Wow, Yosef. Yosef, you're the best, man. Yosef, you're amazing. Telling you this, Yosef. Yosef, what do you want to say?
I mean, so how did,
Okay, go ahead.
what's the final answer? How do they all come together?
So let's go through this a little bit. Listen to this. Fascinating idea here.
That's how you win.
What does it mean? What's this idea they were forced? A simple pshat, by the way, just simple pshat literally means Hashem picked up a mountain.
Yeah.
We could learn the Gemara kipshuto. Simple pshat, they were forced. It's true. But Rabbi Friedman told me an idea. Someone else says this idea. He didn't remember who said it. You know, by Purim we're supposed to say b'shem omro, but I don't know who says this. But it's a beautiful idea. It says like this: we have to put into perspective the history here, the timeline, in order to appreciate this idea. We know the Jews were taken out of Mitzrayim, right? Jews are in Mitzrayim. What happens in Mitzrayim? You have fantastic miracles. Nisim v'niflaot. You have 10 makot. You have Kriyat Yam Suf. You have man falling from heaven. You have Kabbalat HaTorah. All of these. Let's continue in the timeline for a second. Following Kabbalat HaTorah, we have what's called Nevi'im. We have Nevi'im. What is Nevi'im? Prophecy. What does prophecy mean?
Messengers
You
of Hashem.
want to know something from Hashem?
Talk to
Go to the Navi, he talks to Hashem, he comes back to you. It's amazing. It's amazing. Living with Nisim. I mean, you're living literally with Hashem. When
Channel 7.
literally, I mean, directly channeled in, connected. When does Nevuah stop? When does prophecy stop?
The destruction of Bet HaMikdash. no?
So, really, the last of the Nevi'im was the beginning of Bayit Sheni. It was the beginning of the second temple. So let's just remember, you have Bayit Rishon, you have prophecy, you have Nevi'im, you're keyed into Hashem. You want to know anything, you're living with wonders, living with miracles. They're kicked out of Eretz Yisrael. What happens? Bavel, Galut Bavel. The Jews are sent to Bavel. Then eventually there's the Purim story. The Jews go back to Eretz Yisrael and Nevi'ut stops. Okay, the last of the Nevi'im, Chagai, Zechayu, Malachi, that's the end of prophecy. Listen to this idea. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes you out of Mitzrayim, He gives you man, He does 10 makot, He reveals Himself at Har Sinai, Kriyat Yam Suf, all of these things, and then He tells you, would you like to accept my Torah? Is there any greater force than that?
No.
Are you going to
You're
say...
holding the mountain.
hold on. Hold on, you're stuck on the mountain, I get it. Are you going to say no?
No.
You're not going to say no. God literally just did all the miracles in the world. He turned over the entire world, took you out of Egypt. You're living day to day with miracles in front of your face. Hashem is revealed in front of you. They saw at Kriyat Yam Suf something that Shvachot saw it at Kriyat Yam Suf, what future Nevi'im wouldn't see. You're living literally with Hashem. Do you have an option really to say no?
No.
You don't have an option. Rav Friedman is explaining the idea of being forced on a deeper level is they didn't really have an option to say no. This wasn't a voluntary acceptance.
So why you did that?
Hold on. It's symbolic. It's symbolic. The way he's explaining it is it's symbolic. They didn't really have an option. there wasn't really an option, it wasn't really a choice. Hashem comes and He does all these miracles for you. It's clear that God is there. And then He tells you, would you like to accept my Torah? Of course you're going to accept His Torah. You don't have an option in that. There's no free choice there. You're not accepting it voluntarily.
Right.
And then this essentially continues because you're living with Nevi'im, prophecy. Prophecy, you're keyed into Hashem. There's miracles in the Beit HaMikdash. You're living with constant flow of Nisim and Niflaot, constant miracles every day. That's not a Kabbalah me'ava. That's not a Kabbalah with wanting or voluntarily. You're forced. Now, maybe on Shavuot we'll speak about why that's the way it was then. But the bottom line is, the reality they were living in was compulsory. They couldn't not keep the Torah. They couldn't not do what Hashem wanted. And we know they ended up sinning anyways, were kicked out of Israel. But to say, no, we're not going to accept the Torah, it's not an option. This time period extended, listen to this, till, like I said, really till right after the Purim story. Right after the Purim story, the Jews go back to Eretz Yisrael, they rebuild the Beit HaMikdash, and that's when Nevi'ut stops. So the Purim story is the turning point in our history. When we go from living with miracles, living with God's revelation. You go back, by the way, we've spoken about this many times in Rosh Hashanah, we spoke about this. The second temple, Beit Sheni, they didn't have the same glory, they didn't have miracles. They didn't live on the same, they didn't have prophecy. They didn't have the same levels like they had in Beit Rishon. It was a much lower level of existence. It was a much more natural existence. Not supernatural.
It's like you put water on charcoals and you want to relight them.
It was much more natural. Exactly. It was much more natural. What's the point? The point is, beforehand, the fact they accepted Torah, to have a relationship with Hashem was compulsory. They didn't have an option. That's Bal Korcham. That's Kafa Aliyam Aki Gigit. It's an example. But afterwards, in the days of Purim, as Nevi'ut is winding down, they're going into a situation where they're going to live more naturally with Hashem, you could call it, in more of a natural reality. And after the Purim story, they say, we want to live in the natural order. Voluntarily, we're accepting on ourselves to reestablish that treaty. This is the first time we actually have an option. Because beforehand, it's so obvious, it's so blatant, there's nothing to talk about. There's not even an option, it's compulsory. But now that things are somewhat going to a natural existence, we want to reestablish our treaty with Hashem with our own choice, voluntarily. And that's the whole Purim story. The whole Purim story is Hashem's name is not mentioned in Megillah once. We find that the whole story went through on Sunday, if you remember. It was miraculous, but it was a miracle that occurred totally through nature. The whole thing we went through, what Mordechai said and what Esther put in Achashverosh's head, what he thought about Haman, every step, God didn't reveal himself in an overt, obvious way. There wasn't manna falling from heaven. There wasn't Kriyat Yam Suf. It was all ki'ilu in the natural order of events.
It's a miracle that starts from a human being.
It's a holiday. The whole Purim story is a holiday that happened in the natural order. And this led to the future reality of the Jewish people is we're not going to have Nevi'im very much longer. We're not going to have those miracles in Bayit Sheni like we had. Now we're going to live with Hashem and recognize Him despite living in a natural reality, despite living in a natural existence. And that's Hadar Kiblua Me'ahava. That is that they said, despite that, we're going to look for Hashem in nature. We're going to recognize Hashem within the natural order of reality. So what happened was, in the days of, it all flows together beautifully. In the days of Arvot Moab, there was this potential that existed for the Jews to accept it willingly if they wanted. The only thing is, the miracles made it practically impossible, but it existed already. Later in the days of Purim, after these miracles occurred, and the Jews said, we know it wasn't an overt miracle, that we're compelled to accept Hashem, but we want to dedicate ourselves to accept Hashem me'ahava, voluntarily from love. And the reciprocation of that is, Hashem of course is going to accept that. Hashem always accepts us, that's not a question. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu also accepted in Shamayim, because that's the natural reciprocation Hashem always does for us. So the entire thing is one story. But the lesson here is so powerful. Listen to this lesson. And this is really, we take with us. After Bayit Sheni, like I said, after the Purim story, went back, we built Bayit Sheni, that's true. We had a Beit HaMikdash, but it was nothing like Bayit Rishon. Essentially, this was a precursor to the Jews in Galut. That's essentially what this was. We went back to Beit Sheni, built it, but then we were kicked out again, let's say 500 years later. It wasn't the same ever again like Bayit Rishon. It never existed like that again. What the story of Purim is that we're not living in the compelled reality. We know Hashem exists because we see Him through miracles, through the Nevi'im. But now we're going to look and seek HaKadosh Baruch Hu out in the natural world, in the nature of things. The whole Purim story is not a miraculous, overt. It's not. You want to call it natural miracles? Exactly. It's natural miracles. It's not miracles in the overt. There was no Kriyat Yam Suf. It's true the Jews were saved. They defended themselves. The Gzeirah was overruled. It was overruled by the king. Everything could be excused if you would like to. Hashem's name is not mentioned in the Megillat Esther. I think it's such a powerful message. When we approach Purim this year, I think this is something we should go in with the thought process. And I'll finish off with one last point. But the idea of Purim, which we're supposed to take, at least I'm going to take from this, is we don't live in a reality of miracles. We don't. We do our day-to-day. We wake up in the morning. We go pray shacharit. God willing, we learn for an hour at least. And then we go to work. Right, Baruch Hashem, Chazak Baruch. Then we go out to work and we work for hours. We come home, spend time, v'chulei. It's all in the natural order, and it's very easy sometimes to get lost and to start to say, "All right, kochi v'otzem yadi, I'm the one calling the shots. I'm the one pulling the strings. I'm really the one in charge." But the story of Purim tells us, in nature, in a certain way, if you see through nature Hashem, you live with Hashem through nature, through your everyday activities, in a certain way, that's on an even higher level than the original Kabbalah. Why? They couldn't have a choice. Here we have a choice. Meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I don't reveal myself so overtly. Things are not clear in this world. And we have to go seek out HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We seek Him out in the nature, in the work, and in the family, and in the problems, and in the struggles, and all of those things that come along with it. That's the message of Purim. I'll just finish off with one last pet peeve. But l'chaim, l'chaim. L'chaim, l'chaim. This is something that I personally have a shita about, my own personal thing. I'm at a table of Sfaradim, so I have to be careful what I'm about to say. But I know we're amongst friends here, so I'm not really worried. You know, people sometimes people come over to me and they tell me, I'll tell you the greatest story, and he tells me a story about a Kabbalist or a Chacham, and he was able to do this great miracle, and it's so inspirational, v'chulei, v'chulei. Now, assuming the story's true, which it may or may not be true, that's okay, that's a distinction to make. Even if it is true.
What assuming what true?
Assuming those stories are true. Meaning, some of them are true and some of them are not true, right?
What not true? What story?
You hear a story, the rabbi, he was able to make money fall from heaven. Fine, okay. Assuming the story is true. Let's say it is true.
Okay.
That doesn't inspire me to a 1/10 of the degree that I'm inspired when I see Matan make an hour to learn in the morning. It doesn't inspire me a 1/10 of seeing the Chevra come to learn Wednesday night. It doesn't inspire me an ounce.
Because of the sushi.
The sushi, fine. Why am I saying that? Because for me, it's obvious. It's pashut. If someone's close to Hashem, Hashem is Mekor HaBracha. Of course he could do miracles. To me, there's no chidush in that. There's no chidush in that. The chidush is that he built himself up to a degree that he's so close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he could do a miracle. Understand what I'm saying? The inspiration to me isn't that, he can make the arak continue to pour. That's not the inspiration for me. The inspiration for me is that he's so close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He worked his entire life to become an Adam Gadol, a Talmid Chacham and a Tzaddik. If you're so close to Hashem, you're connected. Of course the arak's going to flow. It's not even a question. Hashem could do anything, so if you're connected, you could do anything too. The chidush is he, as a human being, a regular flesh and blood, and he worked on himself to develop himself to such a degree. So for me, personally, those stories don't speak to me as much as seeing people who struggle, whether that's in religious sense or in there's emotional, familial, and they persevere and they work hard to develop and increase and improve and mature, and then they overcome. That's far more inspirational to me because it's within Teva. That's flesh and blood like me, and I have my struggles, we all have our struggles. That's far more inspirational to me. And with that, I'll finish off and I'll say, Chevra, I feel very blessed to be part of such a Chevra, Baruch Hashem. Because really, a Chevra that works, that we're developing, we're maturing, we're growing, that's an amazing thing. Zat Hashem, this Purim, should be the greatest inspiration of all. L'chaim, l'chaim.
You know, when I